The first artificial object in history to cross the Kármán line was the V-2 ballistic missile. So, what's the Kármán line? It's the imaginary boundary between Earth's atmosphere and space. Yep, 100 kilometers above sea level. The V-2 went all the way up to 188 kilometers, and that happened back in 1944 in Germany at the Peenemünde test site. That place was basically the Reich's rocket HQ, a research center where they put this bad boy together. And the guy behind it? None other than Wernher von Braun. One day he walks up to Auguste Piccard, who's out there launching balloons into the stratosphere, and goes, "Yo, dude, love what you're doing, but I'm trying to hit the moon." By that time, Wernher wasn't just doodling rocket designs on napkins, he was actually building and launching them. Then a certain frustrated painter came to power, We Too kicked off, and when Germany realized things were going south, they called up Wernher like,
"Listen, bro, life's rough, man. Wouldn't it be sick if we had a rocket that could take us to the stars, explore the vastness of space?"
Sigh. Yeah. Actually, we got one. Not orbit ready yet, though.
Aight, let's tweak it.
You even know what you're doing?
Yeah, my buddy went to college for 3 years, told me how this stuff works.
So, are we launching now?
Chill, man, we gotta test it first.
Aight. So, did it make it to orbit?
Yeah, about that. It kinda crashed.
Crashed?
Yeah, on London. Bring another one.
Deploying that thing didn't change the war's outcome. Germany surrendered, and the scientists at Peenemünde, knowing the Red Army would get to them first, and not wanting to find out how friendly they'd be, dipped west and turned themselves into the Americans. So in the end, the US got the scientists, and the Soviet Union got the testing site with whatever scraps were left behind. Then came the Cold War. The US and the USSR started stacking nukes like crazy, each trying to keep the other in check. But the Soviets had a problem. See, to drop an atomic bomb on your enemy, you need a plane, and the whole damn world was covered in US military bases packed with bombers. The Soviets, yeah, they had no such bases, and flying across the ocean, way too far. So they ditched the planes and started cooking up a rocket that could get the job done. Enter Sergei Korolev. Dude had a tough gig, because unlike the Americans, the USSR didn't get a full V-2 rocket to reverse engineer, so Korolev had to figure it out on his own. And so in 1948, the Soviets built the R-1, a ballistic missile with a range of 270 kilometers, too short. A year later, they came up with the R-2, now reaching 600 kilometers. Better, still not enough. Meanwhile, the Americans had full V-2 blueprints and the guy who designed them, but they weren't exactly in a rush, so their 600-kilometer range missile wasn't even tested until 1953. By that time, the Soviets were already launching the R-5 in Astrakhan, packing a 1,200-kilometer range. For context, that's like shooting a missile from Moscow into the Black Sea. Still not enough. But then, 4 years later, they finished her. The R-7, 8,000-kilometer range. August 21st, 1957. Boom. First intercontinental ballistic missile ever. It flew from Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan all the way to the Kura test site in Kamchatka. At least that's what the newspapers said. Yo, the papers are saying the test was a success. And? Well, nothing actually landed here. What do you mean? I mean what I said. Maybe give it a week or two. Idiot. Turns out the warhead burned up in the atmosphere right before hitting the target. Back to the drawing board. Yo, you're out here flexing on all of America. Yeah, just a little more to go. Meanwhile, the Americans were planning to launch their own satellite in 1958. Ugh, don't even remind me. But hey, while they're busy figuring out heat shielding, I've got time. We could beat them to it. And sounds like a hype move. Since launching a satellite doesn't require fancy heat shielding, they stripped the R-7 of all the unnecessary bits and built a satellite instead. Didn't waste time thinking up a name. October 4th, 1957. Boom. Off to space. And just like that, humanity entered the space age. Soviet science took the W, but America, yeah, they were stressed. First off, what the hell is that thing flying overhead? Does it shoot lasers? Control the weather? And second, how the hell did the Soviets get there first? Oh, and the satellite wasn't flying solo. The second stage of the rocket was chilling up there with it for 2 months. No time to rest, though. November 3rd, Sputnik 2 goes up along with a doggo named Laika. Unfortunately, that flight was one way. She died a few hours in due to a design flaw, but honestly, she never had a chance. There was no way to bring her back. The experiment did prove that living beings could survive reaching orbit, but the world was pissed. Animal cruelty and all that. I mean, they could have just launched Khrushchev, or, a random guy off the street. For the record, Laika wasn't the first animal in space, just the first to orbit. Before her, flies, a monkey, and even two dogs named Desik and Sigan had already crossed the Kármán line. 3 months later, the US finally got their turn. Explorer 1, who was running the show, Werner von Braun. They could have launched sooner, but the American military wanted to roll out their fancy Vanguard TV-3 first to calm down the public, who were freaking out over the Soviet satellites. December 6th, boom, rocket goes up in flames. That's when they turned to Werner like, "Hey, man, load up your Explorer." The second try at launching Vanguard happened on March 17th. This time, success. January 2nd, 1959, the Soviet Union launches the Luna 1 probe. Guess where? Nope, wrong. The moon. This was the first spacecraft in history to hit escape velocity. Let's break it down. First, cosmic speed, the speed needed to enter orbit and stay there. For Earth, that's 7.9 kilometers per second. Second, cosmic speed, the speed needed to dip out of Earth's gravity forever, minimum 11.2 kilometers per second. Due to a miscalculation, Luna 1 missed the moon and ended up becoming an artificial satellite of the sun instead. 2 months later, the Americans pulled the same move with Pioneer 4. Fast forward 6 months, September 14th, Luna 2 straight up face-planted onto the moon, delivering 2 of these metal plaques as souvenirs. And on October 4th, Luna 3 snapped the first ever pics of the far side of the moon. Meanwhile, the US launched 2 prototype spy satellites, Discoverer 1 and Discoverer 2. Then in 1960, they sent up Echo 1, a communication satellite, which was literally just a giant shiny balloon bouncing radio signals. But back to the Soviets. August 19th, 1960, they launched Sputnik 5 with Belka and Strelka on board. These 2 pups spent over a day orbiting Earth and actually made it back home safe. Also chilling on the spacecraft, mice, plants, and insects. Fun fact, one of Strelka's puppies, Pushenka, got gifted to JFK's daughter by Khrushchev. So yeah, turns out that's what kept the world from nuclear war. Anyway, the experiment proved that space was ready for human passengers. So yeah, that was the next step. April 12th, 1961, Yuri Alexeyevich Gagarin, 108 minutes, 1 full orbit around Earth, a smooth return, the first human in space, the US. Yeah, they pulled it off too, a year later. By that time, the Soviets had already sent up German Titov, who spent a whole day in orbit. That was in August 1961. Then in 62, Vostok 3 and Vostok 4 launched together, like a space buddy trip. 1963, Valentina Tereshkova becomes the first woman in space. October 12th, 1964, Soviets roll out Voskhod 1, the first 3-person spacecraft, another first in the bag. March 18th, 1965, Alexei Leonov goes for a spacewalk. Sounds cool, right? Well, his suit inflated like a damn balloon, and he couldn't fit back into the capsule. Had to secretly lower the pressure inside, risking blood nitrogen boiling, which is exactly as bad as it sounds. A few days later, the US launched their own multi-cruise ship. Then in June, Ed White took an American spacewalk. His problem? The hatch wouldn't open to let him back in. January 31st, 1966, Luna 9 lands softly on the moon. First probe to pull that off, takes some pictures, sends them home. 6 months later, the Americans do the same thing. Then in 1968, Apollo 8 sends humans into lunar orbit. And July 1969, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin land on the moon. 1 small step for man, 1 giant leap for mankind. And that's it. America calls the space race won. USA, USA, applause. Hold up. What? I had the first satellite, first dogs in orbit, first human in space, first woman in space, first spacewalk, first soft moon landing, and you're telling me this is how it ends? Wait, you want to keep going, don't you? Damn right. So the US went to the moon again. November 14th, 1969. Since being first on the moon is no longer an option, the Soviet Union is like, not interested. September 12th, 1970. Luna 16 goes to the moon by itself, grabs some dirt, and brings it back. No astronauts needed. 2 months later, Lunokhod 1 lands on the moon. This thing roams around, snaps a ton of photos, analyzes soil, and even sends a Women's Day greeting on March 8th. Then it just stays there. Even today, it's still up there, acting as a reflector for laser distance measurements. 1 month later, later, December 15th, 1970, the first successful landing on Venus. Venera 7 touches down, measures hellish temperatures and crushing pressures, and promptly dies. April 19th, 1971, the USSR launches Salyut-1, the first space station in history. By the end of 1971, both nations turn their attention to Mars. The US sends up the first artificial Mars satellite, which takes tons of pictures of the red planet and its moons. The Soviets? They crash one probe, then soft land another, but it dies almost immediately. March 3rd, 1972. The US sends this into space. You know every science YouTuber has already told you about it. It's a message for aliens describing us humans because sure, they'll totally be able to decipher it. One question though, where's the other 240 genders? Meanwhile, the US launches their own space station and celebrates New Year's in orbit. Spring 1974, NASA's Mariner 10 takes photos of Mercury and the USSR. They one-up everyone by putting Salyut 3 in orbit, equipped with a 23mm automatic cannon. America sees the first ever space gun and goes, let's just call it a friendly tie. Hands where I can see 'em, buddy. Please, hands where I can see 'em. Then finally, on July 15th, 1975, the Apollo-Soyuz handshake happens. American and Soviet astronauts dock their ships in orbit and shake hands. Cold War tensions momentarily suspended. Thanks for watching, for the like, for the subscribe, and for ringing that bell. Shout out to my Patreon supporters. Maybe one day you guys will fund an editor or a writer. No pressure. All right, peace.